everyone, this is Ashley Ellenboss with Sky House Herb School and Apothecary, and today is part 4 of our energetic series. We'll be looking at damp conditions. So let's cruise on over to our slides where we will dive into this material. So today is 2-in-1 because damp isn't just unlike the other energetics we'll be talking about, damp actually has 2 parts. And this comes from the ancient method of looking at the 4 main qualities: hot, cold, damp, and dry. And this model was turned into the 6 tissue states somewhere in the early 1900s. And this 6 tissue states was used by the eclectics and many other herbalists at the turn of the century. So I'm going to be teaching you a little bit about these 2 distinct types of damp because I find that they are very unique. And if you can identify which kind of damp you're working with, you'll be much more successful with your plants. So damp conditions, I want us to start off by thinking about water and how water behaves, how it moves, how it responds. So water can do 2 things. It can either move in a flowing fashion like a river or a stream or a creek or like rain, but water can also become very still where it can become stagnant. Now, water, no matter what, likes to move downwards. So we want to think about this because water will tend to move as gravity does, and it'll tend to accumulate in the lowermost regions of the body. So we can think about water accumulating in the ankles, like edema, water settling like mucus in the lungs or in the sinuses. So we always want to think about how each element behaves, and that'll help us to understand the best way to work with our plants. Now, the other thing that water does that is a beautiful gift and a curse is that it washes things away, and it's very cleansing. So this can be very good. If water is flowing through our body in a very healthy way, this will take away toxicities, impurities, just like rain will clean the streets and make a city feel fresh. It will do the same thing in our body. However, if there's too much rain, we can have flooding and it will wash away buildings, streets. Think about tidal waves. And it can do the same thing in our bodies. It can flush out nutrients and strip our body of our vital vitamins and minerals. As water can also take the shape of the container it's in, water can also be responsible for storing things like storing emotions and holding on to maybe outdated beliefs. It will fill and store things. So what we really want in an ideal situation is for water to fill and hold and store what is needed and to help us cleanse and move and process what needs to be released. So the next one I wanted to show, we've been going back each of these sessions as I talk about energetics and herbalism. We've already talked about in previous classes the element of fire and the element of earth. We've talked about hot and cold. Now we've moved on to dampness or wet. And wet is often associated with cold and heat. And this is why we have 2 very separate ways that water can behave in the body, because water is so responsive to heat and cold. It will freeze, or with heat, it will become more fluid-like, as if you think about honey. If you heat up honey, it becomes more viscous. And if you freeze it, it becomes more solid. So this leads us to the 2 types of dampness in the body. We have heat and damp combining, which creates this damp relaxation or this flowing relaxation. And in nature, we see this as the way water moves through a healthy ecosystem. And again, too much can strip away the land. It can also strip away the nutrients in the body. So again, this is too much flow. And too much relaxation of the tissues in the body can reduce and dilute the concentration of needed minerals throughout our system. And this can be quite dangerous. This can lead to heart issues. It can lead to very serious nutrient deficiencies. So we want to be really mindful of water that's flowing too fast. On the other hand, we can have water that it's moving too slow. We can have water that congeals, that gets stuck and becomes stagnant. And so if the water in our bodies isn't moving, it can create bogs, marshes, and really in our bodies, what this ends up doing is creating detox toxicity, which we need detoxification for. And the decaying organic matter that we find in nature that creates that really stinky smell in bogs and marshes can also lead to that type of toxic buildup in our bodies. So even though we might not walk around smelling like a bog, if you kind of have like a stagnant taste in your mouth, if your bowels are stagnant, if your urine is very cloudy, these are all signs that we might not have enough fluid flow in our system. So damp conditions that are of the flowing nature. So this is damp relaxation. And you can think about, again, anytime you apply heat to a fluid, it's going to flow faster. So in our bodies, this is going to show up as diarrhea. And anytime we have diarrhea, it's heat and flow. And often with diarrhea, the main risk, and this is why with babies, it can be so dangerous, and with puppies and young animals, is because the nutrients are flowing out of the system before the digestive system is having a chance to absorb them into the body. And again, that can be very dangerous for babies, but we might not even realize that it can be very dangerous for adults as well. So chronic diarrhea is something to really be serious about and to really try to treat as quickly as possible. We can also have damp relaxation, which can be a lack of tone in the tissues. So if we think about what happens when a tissue becomes too relaxed, it's not able to hold its functional state and to do its necessary functions. So this can also be dangerous. And we can sometimes see this, in my practice, I use tongue diagnosis, or we call it now tongue assessment legally. So when you look at the tongue, if the tongue is just atonic, which is it's lax, it has a very sort of depressed and weak and lax state. Sometimes we can see that. We can say, well, I wonder what other tissues in the body have a lack of tone. We can see this in muscle tone as well. So a person who maybe they're exercising and lifting weights, but they just have no muscle tone. This can also be a sign that there is a fluid imbalance or a damp relaxation happening in the body. If we go to the other side of the coin, damp stagnation, what that's going to look like is the person who is too full. Now, they don't have a lack of fluid, the ability to hold fluid in the body. They're going to actually have too much fluid in the body. They're going to have edema, swelling, hardness, tension in the body because of this buildup. And this buildup, this fluid buildup, can create those toxic conditions. But what we often see for damp constriction or damp stagnation is mucus. This can be mucus in the throat, like having to clear your throat a lot. This can be mucus in the sinuses, so constantly having to blow your nose, or just having a feeling of tightness and mucus in the sinus cavity. This can also be mucus in the digestive system, and sometimes mucus in the bowels. So these are all signs of damp. Dampness can also show up in the nervous system and in the way that our metabolism works. So this can be like our whole system of our thyroid function and how our whole metabolic system runs. So that is something that you might want to consider as well. Now, what are our herbal strategies? What do we do for each of these? How do we take care of this? What do we do to make sure that this is being taken care of? So I am going to pause for just 1 second and we'll come back. So what we will do is look at our herbal strategies for both damp relaxation and damp stagnation. This is one, again, this is going to be a pretty full discussion. So you can always come back and listen to it later, but I really want to make these distinctions so you have them in your toolbox. So for damp relaxation, we need to think about toning the tissues, bringing more dryness in. And we do this by astringing or using astringent herbs. And often because of heat exacerbating the problems of damp relaxation, we want to soothe the heat. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean we have to cool the system down. We don't always need that, but we might just need to soothe the heat. We might want to think about using some anti-inflammatory herbs. Then for damp stagnation, when things are really stuck and the mucus is kind of building, think about how do we open the channels of elimination? And our primary goal here really is detoxification. And we're going to have to add heat to this side. So we want to warm and stimulate the tissues. All right, now herbs to tone for damp flowing. When we have fluids flowing out of the system too fast, our astringent herbs are going to be the key. And astringent herbs, they have the taste of being drying. And if you can just think about the things that dry out your tongue, I think about pomegranate fruit that's very astringent and drying. A lot of people think about witch hazel on their skin, how they use it as a skin toner. So these are all the same, we're thinking of the same compounds here. And these drying herbs will restore tone to the tissues. And because we've been talking about chemistry in this series, we're going to talk about tannins. So the tannins are the phytochemical responsible for this drying taste. And so maybe when you were thinking about things that dry out your mouth, maybe you thought about coffee or black tea or red wine. Those are all the very common ones that a lot of people say, oh yeah, that's okay. The way that I feel after I've had a few glasses of red wine, my mouth feels dried out. The next day, my skin's really dried out. That is because of the tannins. So, again, that can be a bad thing, but for someone who has damp relaxation, it can be a very good thing. It can actually be very therapeutic for them to have some of these compounds. And other things that have tannins that are a little bit maybe more on the gentle side herbally would be herbs like rose petals and red raspberry leaves. We're going to talk about other ones. Chocolate is another one that has tannins. If you eat a lot of really dark chocolate, you'll get that astringent taste as well. Now, in the last class, when we took a look at our herbs that are very heating to help with cold conditions, we noticed that one family of plants has a lot of herbs with these volatile oils, and that is the mint family. But in this case, we have another plant family group that has a lot of herbs that have tannins that are very astringent, and this is the rose family. So again, I think in the last recording, I was like, I think I should do a whole class or a series on plant families. Let me know if you like that idea. Leave me a note in the comments section, but I think that might be helpful. So rose family plants that are packed with tannins include medicines like rose petals, red raspberry leaves, blackberry leaves, and blackberry root. Blackberry root is even more astringent than the leaves, but both of them can be used medicinally. We also have hawthorn leaves, agrimony, and cinquefoil. So we'll talk a little bit more about when you can use these herbs, but all of these are in the rose family. They have flowers with 5 petals, multiple stamen, and often have these very jagged, sharp-edged leaves. Now, again, I think it's most helpful, at least my guess is for you all, to think about specific conditions and then which herbs are going to be best for them. So if you have any issues with damp relaxation in your cardiovascular system, so let's just say you're having heart issues. And this doesn't have to necessarily be anatomical or physiological. This could be more emotional. But if you're feeling like your heart or your cardiovascular system doesn't have the tone and the strength and maybe the discernment and maybe the boundaries that it needs, then rose and hawthorn are wonderful medicines for that particular pattern. These can also be, both rose and hawthorn can be used for the digestive system, but they really do have an affinity more for the heart and the cardiovascular system. Now, for the digestive system, herbs that are astringent would be things like blackberry leaf and root. Again, the root is going to be more astringent. Blackberry root is my favorite go-to herb for diarrhea, chronic or even acute diarrhea. Meadowsweet is a wonderful digestive astringent plant. It also has a little bit of an anodyne quality, so it can be helpful for pain. It has some of the same compounds. It has the same compound as aspirin has in it. Yarrow is a wonderful, gentle astringent for the digestive system. And then I would say if you have, a lack of tone in the digestive system, you may want to consider drinking black or green tea, but I would recommend decaf since sometimes caffeine can aggravate things like diarrhea. So if you don't have that, but you have maybe a lack of tone in the digestive system, maybe you have difficulty having, full bowel movements and you need some help toning that area, then you may want to try those plants. What about for the reproductive system? For women who are trying to conceive or for men that are looking for more tone, red raspberry leaf and rose petals are also wonderful plants that can be taken internally as a tea, ideally. And for nervous system atonicity, I was thinking about this one, for people that maybe, again, for maybe more of the emotional part where there's a lack of boundaries. Agrimony is one of my favorite tonifying boundary keeping plants. And Matthew Wood, one of my teachers, who I probably mention all the time in these classes, he talks about it being asshole repellent, or think about people who maybe have a hard time with boundaries, and so they let people in. And maybe for people who tend to attract those folks who are not as respectful of their personal space and boundaries, or maybe they do emotional dumping on you. Agrimony is a wonderful protector plant. It is also a nervine, so we get two things in one. We get that more esoteric, mystical quality of it being a repellent of bad energy people, but we also have this very physiological action of this plant relaxing the nervous system and helping us to find authentic joy, like real joy, not just I'm smiling, aren't I happy? But the real joy that comes from knowing who you are, your place in things, and being relaxed in that centered space. Other ways that we can tone, and again, these are just general ideas of how we can tone and reduce that damp relaxation. Again, too many things flowing through too fast, is dietarily, we can increase astringent foods and drinks. We talked about tea, but foods, a lot of beans tend to be quite astringent. So chickpeas are probably the most astringent, but even black beans, kidney beans, beans in general are considered to be more astringent foods. And bananas are also quite astringent. You want to avoid heat in the physical environment as much as possible, and not avoid summer in the sun, but excessive heat. And you may also want to avoid excessively spicy foods because, again, heat is going to exacerbate the flow. I didn't say this before, but this could also be mucus in the nose. If you constantly have a runny nose, your nose and sinus is draining all the time, all of these recommendations are going to be helpful as well. And then schedule intervals of focus activity. So for damp relaxation, this is also kind of a vata type of predicament where there is just a lot of energy flowing, a lot of leakiness. I also think of this as sort of like a Pisces, a Pisces place too. There can be, Pisces can often fall into both damp relaxation and damp constriction or stagnation. We'll talk about this in the Roots and Spheres course, but so for the those out there who are maybe water signs, Pisces, Cancer, Scorpio, if you're finding that you're getting overwhelmed by emotions, you may want to just try to set aside a time every day where you do something that's very focused. And, I have a picture here of someone creating flower bouquets. So maybe you just every day you go out and you do one activity that brings you a lot of joy and helps you to stay focused and do something that is very nurturing for you. So whatever that might be, this is just one idea because I'm a Taurus and I love flowers, but you can probably come up with your own daily focused activity. And then thinking also about plugging the leaks in your energy stream. Are there people who are energy vampires in your life? Are there places that you go that drain your energy? So, how might you change your environment and your choices to help you find more of that toned, clear, concise spaces and places internally and externally to support you in this work? Okay. So now let's look at part two, the opposite side, damp stagnation. So this is going to be when the water gets stuck. What happens when the water is not flowing? This can happen to water signs as well, and all signs, but especially those water signs. So herbs that will detoxify and move. Think about heating and creating flow in the body. This image is just two elephants playing in complete joy and bliss in the rain. I just couldn't help but choose it. It's really not anything about damp stagnation, but maybe there's a little glimpse in here of the kind of joy that happens when we're really experiencing the flow of water. For this pattern, you really want to think about, how do I thin and remove the things that are holding me down or that are creating stagnation in my body? And the tastes that are going to do this are going to be the bitter taste and the tonic or grassy taste. So the bitter taste is probably our number one best detoxifying flavor profile out there. Anytime, we have bitter taste receptors not only in our tongues, but we have bitter taste receptors in our hearts, in our gut, even in our brain and in our reproductive organs. And you might wonder, why would we need a taste receptors? Why would we need these receptors for the bitter taste in these different organ systems? We don't know exactly, but we do know that these are kind of like warning symbols, especially in the gut. The bitter taste can sometimes be can signify a poison, because a lot of our bitter plants are poisonous. Not all, but some. So we have this built-in system that tells us that something could be potentially a poison. But the good side of that is when we take in a bitter plant that is not a poison, it kickstarts every part of our body to wake up, to produce more fluid, and to move things out. So that is a great reflex that we can all hop on. And so think about herbs like gentian, dandelion root, burdock root, our aromatic bitters like angelica, foods like dandelion leaves, and all the other bitter foods. Most of the foods that are bitter, like a lot of our arugulas and greens and a lot of vegetables have a little bit of a bitter flavor. So that's all really good for our bodies. And then tonic and grassy would be things like nettles, cleavers, chickweed, some of our fresh herbs that really help to not only fill our bodies with minerals, but help move things out. Now, for our detoxifying herbs, these are the grassy green ones, our alteratives or depuratives. This is the action name. So if you ever get into studying herbalism, you'll have to learn herbal actions. These are medical terms that have been used for thousands of years. And so the term alterative and depurative simply means that it alters our body's metabolic function and does that by increasing it. And depuratives purify the interstitial fluids and all the fluid pathways of the body. So these are good things. We should be taking these in every day if possible. So nettle leaf, burdock root, dandelion root, cleavers, chickweeds, even celery, all of these are really wonderful detoxifying herbs that will help to move that fluid stagnation and all the toxins that might be in there out of the system. And then our bitter herbs, let's see, do I have bitter taste? So I do have these. So let's go down to this next slide, because here in the digestive system, for the bitter taste, bitter and the digestive system really work well together. So any aromatic bitter, I included angelica and wormwood in this list. But if you go to, let's say, Herbalists and Alchemists, which is a great herbal company, you can find they have a great aromatic bitters blend that they've blended for you. And that's a great one to take for cleansing the digestive system. Burdock root is excellent as well. But that would kind of, I think any bitters blend, and these are traditional, these are ancient recipes that people have been taking for long periods of time throughout Europe and really throughout the world, are these very bitter tonics. Even in the Amazon, these bitter herbs are used to cleanse and purify the body. So, what about the sinus and the respiratory system, or respiratory if you're in the UK? I always loved that when I lived in Australia for a year, and I loved they would say the respiratory system and the musculoskeletal system. So I always want to say that. So I just was able to. Thank you. Um, so horseradish, mullein, and garlic are excellent herbs to help heat, stimulate, and thin the mucus. You could also think of some of our aromatic herbs like thyme, oregano. They all will help to thin mucus and move it out. Mullein is really especially good for cleansing and repairing the respiratory system. Then we have congestion, skin, acne. And this is something that's very common when we have damp stagnation, is it'll often show up first in the skin. We'll have breakouts, or our skin will just look kind of doughy and thick. So if you have that acne, breakouts, things like that, it can be on the chest, on the face, on the back. My top two herbs for that are nettle and burdock, and use those as an overnight hot infusion, about half a cup of each, and steep it overnight for 8 hours in hot water, and then drink a quart of that every day. So you want to use about a quart of hot water and then drink that every day for 2 weeks, and it'll clear. You'll be amazed. It's really, these herbs are amazing. Now, what about for the nervous system? If you tend to have really sluggish metabolism, maybe your thyroid function is a little bit low, you're feeling a little lethargic. I don't often recommend people to go to coffee or caffeine, but in this case, I will often recommend, if they're not already, maybe, and I would say take out the dairy, but just do a little bit of black coffee or a shot of espresso, or a little bit of black tea or green tea with the caffeine, and that will really start getting the body moving. It's really good for that stagnation. It'll also help the mind get a little clearer too. And if you don't want to do caffeine for any reason, then nettles. Nettles is another, nettles is just perfect for everything that might happen in the damp stagnation category. So do a quart of nettles infusion every day for 2 weeks and see how you feel. To detox and reduce damp stagnation, some other lifestyle tips might be, this is really important, is removing dairy, especially cheese and ice cream. Those are like the mucus producers of all time. So try to cut those out. Sugar, heavy foods, anything that's going to be really damp and cold and heavy, yogurt, all of these are really not good for this imbalance. And it's not to say you can't ever eat them again, but just while these symptoms are present, you want to take them out. Then you want to add heat, like saunas, or this is a place where hot and spicy foods would do really well. So, go up on your sriracha or whatever your favorite hot sauce is, and that will really get things moving. Along with that, move your body. So increase your exercise. That might just be walking 10 minutes every day. It might be getting on the treadmill, whatever it is, but try really moving your body, and that will help for your lymphatic system to detoxify and move everything out along with the herbs. And if you can't exercise, for whatever reason, maybe you have an injury, get a massage, book yourself for weekly massages if you can, because that is really good to promote lymphatic drainage. So even if you can't move, try to get someone else to help you move your fluids, your body. You can enlist a partner or a friend for a little back massage or hand massage. Foot massages are great, and that can be really helpful, along with dry brushing and hot baths. So I wanted to recap because I know we covered a lot of ground here. So for damp relaxation, fluids are flowing. We want to tone and astringe. Think of your rose family plants. These are things like all of our rose petals, red raspberry leaf, blackberry root. And then the tannins that you'll find in tea and coffee are wonderful, minus the caffeine. And for damp stagnation, when things are stuck, heavy, edema, mucus, think about heating and detoxifying the body. Use your bitters, drink your alternative tea herbs, aromatic bitters like angelica and wormwood go really far here. And then our alternative drinks like nettles and burdock. So I hope that's helpful. In our next session, we'll be looking at dry conditions. What are they? What compounds do we need? Which plants have them? And then how do we use them? And that will be our last class of this particular herbal energetic series. If you haven't registered for our Roots and Spheres class that's coming up in the new year, there's still time to do that. We will be meeting twice a month on the new and the full moons to talk about the upcoming transits, and you'll have a list of herbs that you'll be dieting. So we'll actually be dieting for sure nettles and burdock and hawthorn. So if you're interested in trying these herbs and seeing how your body responds to them, then this is a great opportunity. And then we'll talk about your individual responses to these plants as you're undergoing these transits. So you can go to nightlightastrology.com, my husband's website, to register, or you can go to skyhouseherbs.com. If you haven't subscribed yet, please click subscribe. If you like this video, please like it. And if you want to share it with a friend, please do so. That every time you guys do that, it really is helpful. And your comments are always welcome. If you have questions, comments, you have your own herbs that you really love to use for these conditions, please share them. I love to hear and learn from you all as well. So thanks so much, and I'll see you all soon.